Hi and welcome to the NBA show. My name is Morten Jensen and today we'll be talking about the late season signings, so stay tuned. So first up is Mike James of the Brooklyn Nets. He used to play at CSKA Moscow, where he was one of the primary scorers on that team, a guard. He got a chance to sign with the Nets. He just a few hours ago signed a contract for the remainder of the season. He initially signed a 10-day contract, then another 10-day contract, and he is now a permanent fixture with the Nets for the rest of this season. Why is that important? Well, it's always important when NBA teams go out of their way to find talent, even if it's late in the season. James is a perfect example of a playoff team that needs that extra little push coming off the bench. They identify someone overseas, they sign him very late in the season again, and they just work out right off the bat. It's really a tradition in the NBA at this point whenever a team, usually it's bad teams at the end of the year, go for certain upside guys who aren't really in the NBA or who are end of bench guys who might just have gotten waived after the trade deadline or whatever. This time around though, the Nets, they went deep, they went all the way to Moscow to find their guy, and it's worked out so far, and this is why it's so crucial to keep having an open eye on everything that's going on worldwide from a basketball perspective. If you're an NBA team, you can't get locked into this mindset of, well, we'll just have to look at who the guys are in the NBA right now in order to upgrade. Oh, the trade deadline's passed, that means our roster is 100% locked. No, it doesn't work that way at all. You can certainly still find guys, you can get them in on these type of contracts, like 10-day contracts, who later on can get fully guaranteed for the rest of the year if you like that player's production. Mike James has delivered. He's averaged over 7 points a game. He's run the offense. He's been one of those offensive initiators. And yes, he won't be used a whole lot in the playoffs, presumably when Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant are all back on the floor together. That said, he's a nice player to have in case of emergencies. He can play a backup role or he can play a backup to a backup role if that's what you want. That makes a lot of sense for the Nets, and this is how roster construction can add that last little wrinkle in trying to turn yourself into a championship level team, or in the case of the teams that I'm coming to now, just find guys who might be a part of your future. So let's actually stick with the Nets, because here's a guy, Alize Johnson. I've talked about him on this channel before. They signed him. He was very, very productive coming over, and he is locked up for the foreseeable future. I love that deal. He's a 6'8", 225-pound power forward. He's a bruiser. He's someone who can go get rebounds. He can score near the basket. They signed him also just to see what they had him in. Started out as a couple of 10 days, and then they extended him to the full season and actually beyond that. And those contract years are non-guaranteed, so they can just cut bait whenever they want. Those signings are just so smart, and I fail to comprehend why every single NBA team doesn't spend, the late part of the season just trying to establish at least one roster spot for someone they really like, who they know they can get for cheap, and then just test it out. The worst thing is that could happen really is that the player falls through and doesn't really make an effort, and boom, then you kind of move on from him and you find someone else. It's not really all that of a burden. So for the Nets to have locked up both Mike James and Alize Johnson, that's just A+ work. That is working in the margins. After you've established your primary core, you've now identified two players who you know can add value to your team, and you've added them for very, very cheap money. That's just perfect management from a roster perspective. So Sean Marks gets just top marks for this. It's no pun intended. So that's great work by the Brooklyn Nets organization. Next up, the Indiana Pacers and Oshae Brissett. I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name. Whenever I've watched him play over the broadcast, announcers have basically said his last name a million different ways. Brissett, I'm going with, I think, but he's just been a revelation for the Indiana Pacers. He's been a shot blocker, he's been a scorer, he's been a shooter, he's been a rebounder. You really can't find a major hole with him. He's one of those, what you call an undersized power forward, even though he's in my opinion, perfectly capable of playing the 3 as well. He's just a forward, in my opinion. Because he can shoot, he can handle the ball a little bit, he can get in and compete on the glass. He scores roughly 10 points a game. I think it's 9.5, 9.6, something along those lines. 6 boards, shooting 39% from 3. He's just been such a nice boost for their team. And I realize the Pacers have had a rough second half to the year. I get that. For the Pacers to identify someone like Brissett, that is just so crucial, because he came off of Toronto last year during his rookie season. He played 19 games. He wasn't that effective whatsoever. When you look at his college numbers, they weren't impressive either. I know when I watched him play, I wasn't really blown away at all. This was a guy who really didn't play an efficient brand of basketball. But you know what? This goes to show that there are guys out there who just puts in the work. They realize, well, I need to change certain aspects of my game. I need to get better in certain aspects. I need to do this. I need to do that. And now he is a guy who the Pacers have signed for the long term. And look, he is projected to be a rotation player next year as well. He's been doing such a marvelous job of being one of those guys who can just contribute in a wide variety of ways. And for the Pacers, this is a major boon, because obviously they've suffered so many injuries along the way, especially over the last couple of years. T.J. Warren only played 4 games this year. He's been out. So for the Pacers next year, hopefully to go into their season fully healthy and with an Oshae Brissett on their team, that's only going to make them that much stronger. I think just the presence of him actually adds another layer to their top potential, especially if they also make a couple of more roster moves over the summer. So super optimistic about the Pacers, super optimistic about Brissett. This is one of those really nice stories that you can pick up when you talk about late season signings. I think he's just the perfect example of someone who can come in, do the work, put in all that effort, and actually succeed. So this is a great story by the Indiana Pacers. Next up is Luca Vildoza from the New York Knicks, who came over from Spain, from Baskonia. More specifically, he's an Argentinian point guard. He signed a 4-year, $13 million deal with the New York Knicks. Only the first year is guaranteed. From there on out, non-guaranteed. This is another example of a team going out there and saying, let's see what's out there on the global market. Let's try to get them in immediately, so they also get a full summer and a full training camp to acclimate themselves to their new surroundings. Vildoza hasn't played yet, so we'll see what happens there, but it's one of those things where you can get a guy in, and if he produces at a high level, you've got him on the hook for 4 years, 3 years after this one, earning just a little bit more than $3 million per year. And if he outproduces that contract, you're looking at something where you get additional value. It's really this whole Moneyball concept that if you get guys who outproduce their contracts, you damn well know that you have value. You know that you have certain guys who can actually put the ball on the floor, produce at a high level, meaning you don't have to consider moving him for salary cap purposes or whatnot, because you just don't move guys who outproduce their contracts. You move guys who don't. So for them, this is a very, very low gamble, because this contract is non-guaranteed. It's one of those contracts where you kind of look at it and you go, this could be very viable if he even sticks. So there's really no harm done. Again, he hasn't played for the Knicks yet. We'll see what happens. But so far, I think it's an optimistic sign of just taking that approach if you're the New York Knicks. Finally, one of my favorite players who haven't hit the league in a long time, despite, in my opinion, being ready after he came out of Nevada, is Cameron Oliver. He's only played 2 games with the Houston Rockets so far. I know that's a super small sample size. That said, he's averaging 15 points. He's been effective as a shooter, as a scorer, and that's really what I liked about him coming out of Nevada. He's a big, strong, burly guy, 6'8", 230, played the 4, can block shots, can rebound, can hit the 3, can score. Now, granted, he's not going to be one of those full-time starting forwards, I don't think. Defensively, he's a little bit too raw. He doesn't add a whole lot of playmaking. But in a limited capacity role, I think he is one of those guys who can come off the bench for 16-20 minutes, just give you rebounds, shooting, and shot blocking. And you know what? If you can give a team that in a limited amount of minutes, you are an NBA player, and I think he is one. I have been completely mind-boggled by the fact that no team before now have actually tried to give him a chance. He is a guy who's about to turn 25, so he'll also be entering his prime very soon, at least his physical prime. So I guess the Houston Rockets are looking at it and going, well, we're going to be getting the best years out of him if we keep him on after this season. Now, I think they need to do that, and if they don't, I think some other team needs to pick him up. He is just too good of a basketball player not to be finding himself on an NBA roster. He played really well in Australia here before he signed with the NBA. So we're looking at a guy who's just tremendously productive, who does a lot of different things on the court, and he's also got the physicality, the size to be an NBA forward. So I'm super optimistic about his future. And it also goes to show, once again, a team like Houston, they're rebuilding, they're not really doing too hot. For them to find just someone who can break into the rotation and play a brand of basketball that is attractive, that also means that if they retain him, he's a future trade piece if that's what they want. Just getting value, getting talent is priority numero uno for teams that are young, trying to rebuild, trying to reestablish themselves in the grand scheme of the NBA. The Rockets are trying to do that, so for them to identify and locate and sign Cameron Oliver, that's huge, and more teams should be doing this. Finally, that's going to lead to my final point here. And yes, I realize that I might be a biased Dane, but I don't care. I definitely think I'm right about this. Iffe Lundberg from CSKA Moscow, also known as CSKA. Look, he is a 6'3" point guard with a 6'9" wingspan. He is 26 years old. I am sort of blown away that NBA teams really haven't actually gone this way of signing him to this extent, taking like a late flyer on him late in the season. Now, granted, his season is still active. They are in the Final Four in the EuroLeague, so he's got a chance to win it all. That might be why. But this is a guy that should be on the NBA radar. He has improved his jump shot dramatically. His decision making is usually on point. He's a tough-nosed defender because of his long arms and his physicality. He's really strong. He's got a 205-pound frame. I think it's time for people to kind of wake up and go look at Iffe Lundberg. And if you can't find him online, look for his full name, Gabriel Lundberg. He is one hell of a tough cookie when it comes to like the point guard, shooting guard position. He can handle those spots, and in a pinch, you can even throw him up at the three. He's got, like I said, the long arm, the physicality. He's someone who can switch onto bigger forwards, and it still has the foot speed to guard smaller guards. He's a guy I would be looking at if I'm an NBA team, just to see what is there. Could there be a long-term solution there? Because in my opinion, absolutely there is.